Hello there and welcome to Sea Power. My name is Stealth and I'm going to help you get underway learning all the ropes of Sea Power. In this first tutorial we're going to have a look at all the different elements that you can use to control the game. So, starting at the top left of the screen, you have the formation editor. Now I'm saying top left of the screen, but you can drag this thing all over the place. With the formation editor you can quickly jump from one ship to another. It works from ships, it also works with various aircraft, it works with submarines. This is going to basically be your overview of what units do you have at your disposal. There is an important note here. This is currently one formation. So I have the Bergen Reinforced Convoy. This is part of the Gauntlet mission. This means that all of these units are in the same formation. However, if I take one of these ships out of the formation, you can see that it is no longer part of this formation. This means it might not show up in this menu, and as such you will have to keep an eye on that unit separately. So it's not like you'll be able to keep an eye on everything. This again is a formation manager. Next, in the middle of the screen we have the compass. You can see that this ship is just sailing past, but that's because I have the sail past camera on. You can do that by pressing F3. If you press F1, you just follow the ship. In this case, I'm going to put it behind the ship, and you can see that we're on about a course of 0.55 or something like that. So this is your direction of your ship. You can also see that down here on the bottom left-hand side of the screen. Over on the top right, you also have time acceleration and time deceleration. If the action gets really intense, or if you want to take a nice screenshot, you can do that by just slowing the game down. This also slows down your camera movements. My camera is actually quite slow as I'm doing this. If you have search actions going on for submarines, sometimes, for example, that takes a very long time. And in those cases, you might run it at 10, 20, 50 times speed. Sometimes even up to 100. Be advised, however, at 100 times speed, the game can become a little wonky. It can do some things that aren't exactly as intended. So I would recommend not to use the 100 times too often, unless you're just skipping time in order to get to a piece of action. Bottom right hand side. This is the map display. We're currently on, let's say, the visual display. But if you toggle this on, you get the tactical display, which again is completely draggable, so that you can put it in a position of your choosing. And if you click on this one, the maximize, you're just going to get the map display. This is really where everything takes place, and sometimes you may not want to have the tactical display where you see all your ships. The map display is really where, let's say, you live or die, because this is going to give you far better of an overview relative to just having the map view over here, the tactical display. This, yes, it gives you some information, but you can see that the screen is getting quite cluttered. All of my ships appear to be on top of each other. And especially with the ranges that this game has, sometimes you want to get a bit better overview. So I do recommend then potentially pausing the game, which you can do by clicking that, or by hitting the spacebar, and then going to the tactical map. What you can also do in this overview is use various drawing tools. At the moment these are all controlled by the menu, but it's entirely likely that as the game continues to develop, these will be easier to access. We have a ruler that you can use to measure distances from one point to another. You have a flat marker that you can just put an X on the map, and you have the range circle. This is going to allow you to, for example, figure out, okay, my weapons have such and such level of range, and that means that the ship is now in range or it is not. If you want to erase things, just hit the erase, and if you hold shift, you can erase multiple things at once. As a practical example, I'm going to have a look at the Valdez over here. And this ship has the RUR-5. It's an anti-submarine rocket. Now, I'm not going to go into what that weapon is. That's for a different tutorial. This weapon has a range of 6 nautical miles. So I'm going to pause the game here for a second. And I'm going to plot that on the map. So that I know that if this ship were to come up against a submarine, that is the weapon range that I have. So you click on the Valdez. You just drag it out and say, okay, this thing has a range of 6 nautical miles. And there. This is going to now follow the Valdez. So if I'm moving this ship along, you can see that that range circle moves with it. And this can be very useful, not only for your ships, but also for hostile ships. Because it allows you to very quickly see, okay, am I in range? Are they in range? Should I be worried? This does require that you know what your target is. It also requires that you know what your own weapon systems are. And those things are all found in the unit reference. You can access that by right-clicking on a unit and clicking unit reference. And this is going to pull up the menu which shows you what this particular unit is. Be it a plane, be it a submarine, be it a ship, it doesn't matter. Anything is going to get unit reference cards like this. This can also work for the enemy, but you do need to have a full identification on that unit. On this unit reference card you can see a lot of information about the unit that you're currently looking at. In this case, that Nox class frigate that I have. You can see that what the length and the beam is. These two aren't terribly interesting. Max speed is a bit more interesting, because a faster ship might be able to outrun a torpedo. You might, if you're feeling very lucky, be able to outrun a missile, but that is less likely. Sometimes you'll also have units which have range, especially in the case of planes which are launched from a carrier. This can have a range. You can also find what weapons you have, in this case the RUR-5 anti-submarine rocket. And if you then click on that, you can see what the maximum velocity is, what the range is, what it's used for. Sometimes they just have a primary engagement mode, which means they can only really shoot submarines. But sometimes weapons have various roles. If I select the Groves over here, you can see that I have the SM-1MR, the Standard Missile 1 medium range. This has a primary engagement mode of anti-aircraft, but it can also do anti-surface, so you can shoot these things at other ships if you are feeling like doing that. It's not the primary weapon I would pick to do that, but again, that's for a different video. The unit reference card can also be used to figure out what other ships might be out there. Sometimes you might not have a full identification, and you know that the enemy has, for example, a corvette or a frigate. And you want to know, okay, let's say that frigate, it could be an Oliver Hazard Perry, or it could be a Garcia. Let's say it's an Oliver Hazard Perry, it has these weapons. Let's say it's a Garcia, it has these weapons. And then you can start to classify how dangerous a particular opponent might be. I highly recommend using this reference card early and often. This way you can get more acquainted with the game. You can also do this by right-clicking in the, let's say, the 3D viewer and clicking it on there. Very, very much information. There's a lot of information to be found here. Don't just be looking at weapons. Also be looking at defenses. Some ships have noisemakers, which are basically small cans that you toss overboard that make noise and might attract a torpedo so that it doesn't hit the ship. Chaff is there to defend the ship from incoming missiles. Some ships have defenses, some ships don't. You can also find what sonars and sensors are available. You have all sorts of sensors, for example, on this Oliver Hazard Perry class frigate. We have optics, which is basically a visual sensor. You're basically looking out of your ship, and you're either seeing something or you're not. They don't have night vision quality, so at night they won't really be able to see much. We have an air search radar, able to look for targets in the air. We have a surface search radar, looking for targets on the water. We have a hull-mounted sonar, looking for submarines, although it can also be used to find surface ships. You have the towed sonar array, which is a towed array, so basically a sonar, but you tow it behind the ship. You also have ESM, electronic support measures. These are basically, let's say, incoming sensors. Just imagine that you are in a field and it's dark. Somebody else is using a flashlight. The ESM allows you to see that flashlight. So they basically allow you to find out, oh, look, there's something over there. There's a radar over there. And there's various different frequencies, but again, this is too basic of a tutorial to go into all that. And then we have an ECM jammer. This ECM jammer is a bit of a defensive countermeasure, allowing you to potentially jam enemy radars and reduce their tracking performance. Again, more on all of that stuff later. So that is, let's say, the tactical map and the unit reference card. You also have the event log on the bottom right hand side, and I highly recommend that you keep a close eye on this. Anything that you spot, anything that your ships detect, anything that happens, gets noted in the event log. I almost always have this screen up, because it almost always tells me something useful. If I were to activate, for example, the radar on the Valdez, maybe we'll be able to detect something. And if something gets detected, that is going to come up in the event log. Over here we have a new contact. You can see there's multiple new contacts. So we have found something with our air search radar on this ship, and that is immediately put into the event log. You can see the date, you can see the time, and that there's multiple new contacts. Because over here on the tactical display you can now see 2 tracks, but they're kind of overlaid. They're 7001 and 7002. And based on the icon, which is a box, but just let's say the top part, you can see that it's an aerial unit. It could be a helicopter, it could be a plane. Although it's not that likely to be a helicopter, because helicopters don't travel at 600 knots. This is definitely an aircraft. You can also see their direction, which is southwest, or as the course indicator here says, course 229. And there's 2 of them. So if you have something happening in the event log, I would highly recommend that you pause the game and then go and look at what that is. It could be anything. It could be a surface ship, it could be an aircraft, it could be a helicopter, it could even be a submarine. Try and identify things as early as you can, because the more information you have, the better your decision making is going to be. Next, we have the toggle formation manager button. So this is going to allow you to toggle that on or off. You can play without it, and in this case you will have to do a bit more zooming on the map to keep all of your units in check and keep all of your units lined up. But the formation editor is definitely something that you can use. Some units may have their own flight deck. Not every ship will have that. Some of them do, such as some frigates, they can launch helicopters, and of course in case of an aircraft carrier you definitely have options. What this flight deck allows you to do is select what type of airplane you want launched, what sort of loadout you want on that particular plane, what sort of squadron they could draw from. This is really not that important. Their call sign, which is at least currently something you cannot change, but maybe later, and how many different planes you want to use and be assigned to that particular wing. This creates a new formation. So if you just want to have one F-14 Tomcat, you can do that by assigning 1. If you want to have a whole air patrol, you can do that with this. Then you click launch, and of course an aircraft doesn't magically spawn on the flight deck. An aircraft is going to have to get brought up from either a hangar or a hangar deck, such as an aircraft carrier. Sometimes they wheel it out of the hangar in a frigate, sometimes they just launch it from the aircraft hangar and bring it up to the deck. You can see there's the Tomcat, and this also means that the Tomcat is now selectable as a unit on the map. It does look a little weird here. We have the Nimitz in the middle, and then we have Fast Eagle 1. That's the Tomcat on the bow. And we have Fast Eagle 2. That's the Tomcat on the stern. With these, you can then kind of just sit around and wait. If you want to get some nice cinematics, I do recommend pressing F3, which is going to give you a nice follow camera. F2 is going to give you a free camera, which you can then control using mouse and WASD. And if you press F1, you're just going to be following this specific unit. Next up, in the middle of the screen, only if you have a ship selected, only if you have your own ship selected, you can see all sorts of different numbers and weapon systems. We have 8 RIM-7, we have 16 RUR-5. Again, if you're not familiar with naval warfare or aerial warfare to that extent, because airplanes are in the game, that's okay. You can learn all of this stuff. It just takes a little bit of time. And again, that's where that unit reference is very handy. These numbers tell you what you have of what weapon type. So we have 8 RIM-7s. Okay, what's a RIM-7? Well, a RIM-7 is a Sea Sparrow. It's an anti-air missile, which can also be used in anti-surface warfare. It has a range of 10 miles, and it has an attack altitude of 40,000 feet. Currently, warhead size and stuff like that is not in the game yet. But I'm recording this with basically an alpha version of the game. So stuff like that is definitely going to be colored in later, if you will. Next, we have an RUR-5. Okay, what is that? RUR-5 is the anti-submarine rocket. You can read all about these weapon systems in your own time with your own unit. Important to know is that if you click on these things, you can, or actually before you click on these things, you can see that it says ASROC ready. So this is an anti-submarine rocket and it's standing by. If you click on it, the game is going to show you a very small circle, which is the minimum engagement range, which is 1 nautical mile, and the maximum range is 6 miles. If I try to go beyond that, you can, but nothing is going to happen. If you do, however, click something a little closer, the game is going to allow you to do that. So in this case, if I click right click here, the game is not going to say anything. It's going to say confirmed, but it can't really confirm because I don't have that range. if I do try and launch at a shorter range, there we go, that is possible. And that is that 6 nautical miles that I lined up earlier. Now in this case, the RUR-5, it is a torpedo with a small booster attached to it. So if you have a submarine in the area close to your ship, this is a very quick way to have that torpedo meet up with that submarine. This way you can also see what other weapon systems you have. In this case we have another Mark 46 torpedo launcher. We have 640 shells for the 127mm gun. That's the Mark 42 gun, which in this ship is mounted on the bow. We have 20 noisemakers and 70 chaff. Noisemakers and chaff are defensive systems. The noisemaker is something that you can kind of see it here. There it goes. It's tossed overboard, and it's going to sit just behind the ship and make noise. It's going to try and deflect torpedoes from the ship. It's going to pose as the ship. The chaff is something that you pop into the air, and it works. There we go. These are, as far as I can tell, magnesium clouds that pretend to be the ship. So they're generating a very large radar signature, so that the missile that is targeting the ship goes, hold on, there's something even bigger up there. I'm going to target that. Fortunately, you don't have to control these things manually. Both the noisemakers and chaff are controlled automatically by the ship. So if the ship comes under attack, it's going to figure out, oh, hold on, I'm under attack. I need to deploy chaff, I need to drop a noisemaker, depending on what the threat is. Take note that these things do have a countdown. You cannot just deploy 20 noisemakers or 70 chaff. This has a cooldown of about a minute, this has a cooldown of another 11 seconds, and if I click now, nothing happens. So try and just let this be controlled by the AI, at least initially, when you're trying to get familiar with the game, before immediately jumping in and deciding that you want to start dropping these things manually. If you do click while it is still loading, the game is just not going to do anything. And you can see that the countdown timer continues. Only when this countdown timer has finished will the new chaff be launched. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And now we can launch the next chaff. So keep that in mind. You cannot just spam these defenses. This is, I'd say, better handled automatically. Next, over on the bottom left-hand side, we have what is the depth below the keel. 2,316 feet. So the ocean over here is very deep. And this is definitely a safe, well, a relatively safe place to use a submarine, for example. Sometimes you will find that the water is far shallower, and it might not be even traversable for all ships. You can also see what the course of your ship is. You can see what their speed is. If I hover over speed, that lights up. And that means you can click on it, and you can click everything from ahead flank, which is best speed ahead, to all back full, which is try and put the ship in reverse. Changing course can be done either by right-clicking anywhere, and this is going to tell the Valdez to start changing course. Or, if you feel like you want to take direct control, you can. And if you take direct control, you can see that there is a check mark over the unit then. And if I now press A, I can immediately influence the course of the ship. Take note that if you press A, you're basically setting your rudder out to port. So you're trying to make a port course correction. The ship is going to keep turning in a circle unless you tell it to stop by pressing D and centering your rudder again. Using this, you can also speed the ship up. I'm now going 19 knots. I can also slow the ship down. This is sort of a more arcadey way of controlling your ships. And if you have just the one ship, this can work. If you have a lot of ships, I wouldn't really recommend this, because you'll be too much micromanaging one unit and potentially not able to find all of those other units that you might need to have a look at. So yes, you can assume direct control, but I would much rather have a ship stay in a formation, because a formation is generally stronger together. You might have one ship that's currently working on killing off submarines, you might have a ship that's dealing with enemy air threats, you might have a ship that's launching aircraft, in the case of an aircraft carrier. So ideally, just let these ships do what they do best. If one of your units is a submarine, you can not only control its speed over here, and of course its course by clicking on the map, but you can also click the depth indicator. How deep do you want your submarine to go? Anything from surface to very deep is possible. Submarines will keep an eye on their own crush depth. When is it safe to dive and how deep can we safely go? They don't seem to always have a very clear idea of when it's possible to hit the seabed. So sometimes you might have a shallow area. In that case, I would recommend that you do keep an eye out, and very deep in a shallow area might not be possible. So keep that in mind. Of course, planes don't have a depth indicator, they have a height indicator. So if you click on height, you can go anywhere from 100 feet to 53,000 feet. You'll also see what their ordered altitude is, which is currently 2,000 feet. Aircraft will have different layers of altitudes that they can get to. Some aircraft can go really high, some aircraft cannot go as high. So this is going to change per aircraft that you're using. You also have a speed indicator here, everything from loiter to cruise speed to maximum speed to afterburner. Planes do have a maximum range, as indicated by this blue circle. If I activate my afterburners, I'm going to immediately burn through most of that sphere. So my range is suddenly decreased by an enormous margin. This also has to do with my altitude, which is not something I'm going to go into right now that much. But this is how you control your aircraft. Go height and set your speed. I would generally just keep them on cruise speed, and this is once again going to reclaim my range. Let planes mostly decide when to get up to afterburners and when not to. Especially if you start right-clicking other units, hostile units specifically, you'll see that these aircraft decide that they want to use afterburner or not. As for defensive weapons, they too have their own defenses, in this case chaff, and this is something that again the aircraft manages automatically. So aircraft do have their own defensive systems, some of them, not all of them, and will automatically deploy those as and when they see fit. These are some of the basics from Sea Power. How do you control your units? How do you maneuver them around? How do you give orders? How do you launch aircraft? How do you use weapons? Again, it's a basic tutorial, but we gotta start somewhere. As I mentioned at the start, it is a very deep, complex game. Give yourself time to learn. Things will go wrong. You might get frustrated at times because things aren't working the way you thought, or those enemy units, well, those missiles hit a bit harder than you were expecting. Give yourself time to learn, be kind to yourself. Sea Power is a deep game, it will take some time. I hope you find this tutorial useful. If you have any further questions, please let me know down below in the comments, and if possible, I will help you out by answering them there. If not, I might just make another video specifically around your question. Thank you for watching. Good luck on the high seas, and give them hell.